Can you tell us some exciting stories of some of your encounters of going out and looking for Bigfoot?
Oh, certainly. As I said, I started this in 1997. I grew up a fan of monster movies and horror movies and stuff like that, and I got into studying the paranormal and Bigfoot when I was 10. So from that point forward, I familiarized myself, educated myself with as much as possible, and I got into the field actually going out looking for evidence and sign, being proactive rather than reactive. But I was also investigating cases where people would claim that they had sightings or encounters, and I wanted to find out for myself, mainly to see if there was anything legitimacy to their reports, if they were possibly misidentifying something, if they were hoaxing stuff, because there's a lot of different factors that are involved with a Bigfoot sighting. It could be any of those. It could be the real thing, but I always felt as my job as an amateur investigator to try to get to the truth of what people are seeing. So I learned very quickly that you get a variety, a Pandora's box of stuff over the years, as long as you're in it. And there have been some situations and encounters that I've experienced over the years that have been quite intense. They get the adrenaline going and really makes you take a step back and wonder what you experienced. And some of them included, as I mentioned, rock throwing. I was in a location in central Pennsylvania in an area known as Clearfield County. It's in the central part of the state, and it's not a terribly remote area, but where we were at, we were probably about 4 or 5 miles from the closest houses or residents, or from civilization, if you will. And something out there that night wasn't happy that we were there and began throwing rocks at us, and they were literally missing us by a few feet. They would hit the ground or whiz by our head or hit the tree behind us, and you could hear them coming through the trees. It was unmistaking what they were. And they were probably about the size of baseballs, maybe a little bit larger. But whatever was out there wasn't happy that we were there and was trying to drive us out. But of course, we stood our ground, and we weren't going to leave just for some rocks being thrown at us. But it went on all night, and it was periodic. It would come in waves where you'd get like 10 or 15 minutes of just constant rock throwing that would settle down and get quiet. Nothing would happen, and then it would start up again. And the most unique thing about that was, at the time, I had a handheld thermal FLIR where I had a small, probably about a 6 or 7 inch screen that you could look at, and we weren't seeing anything on the thermal FLIR. Nothing was coming up, no heat signature or anything like that. We tried to determine where the rock was coming from, or the direction it was being thrown from, and we'd put that thermal FLIR on it. We wouldn't see anything. So whatever was doing it that night was very elusive and very adept to hiding in the thick foliage and the trees. Either would step behind a tree and hide from us until it threw another rock, but we never saw the source of where the rocks were coming from. That's just one example. Another one in Ohio, I was in southeastern Ohio, and this was in 2008, and I was out with another researcher, and our intent was to meet up with other researchers in this area, this state park. We weren't actually going out to do any Bigfoot researching or investigating. We just wanted to meet up with some fellow researchers that we were friends with, and just to hang out and talk with them and catch up on the latest stuff that they've been doing. And we went to a location in this state park where there had been previous sightings and activity reported, and we thought that's where the location of these other investigators we were going to meet. And we arrived there about probably about 4 o'clock in the morning. Nobody was there. They'd gone home for the night. So myself and the other investigator decided that time we were going to kind of scour that area a little bit and maybe do a little bit of research to see if we could see anything or hear anything or anything was going on in this area, because we knew of the history of sightings and activity that had been reported. And while we were there, we had rocks thrown at us in that location too. And we actually had a couple of tree branches, limbs that were broken and thrown at us. You literally hear them come whizzing by your head or hear them hit the ground, and we found them with flashlights and use of night vision. We were able to pick them up off the ground and see what they were. But again, the foliage and the surrounding trees and brush was so thick that we couldn't see anything in the forest when we put flashlights on or FLIR trying to figure out what was throwing stuff at us. So it's obvious from my personal experiences and talking with hundreds of eyewitnesses and studying that these creatures are so adept to camouflaging themselves very well, hiding in the thick brush and the trees, that they can basically disappear, as it were, kind of blend in so well and hide behind a tree or brush that you won't see them, and even thermal FLIR won't pick them up. And I know from using thermal FLIR that it goes so far into the thick brush, and then the brush can obscure some of the heat readings and temperature readings, that everything looks the same. So, yeah, they're really good at playing hide and go seek, if you will.
Now, like the rock tossing, did it seem like it was like a lot of power behind the rocks? Did it seem like it hit hard?
In some situations, yes. It seemed like it was coming from a pretty good distance, because we could hear it going through the branches and the leaves. You could hear the pitter-patter through the branches as it came towards us. And sometimes it would come in an arc where it seemed like it was throwing it pretty high and then come down bouncing at our feet just in front of us. Other times it would seem like somebody was throwing a baseball at you. It would whiz by your head or just miss you by a few feet. And I found that quite intriguing. It was exciting, actually, to have something or somebody out there in the forest doing that. And people always ask me, well, it was probably somebody else playing tricks on you or trying to get you to leave or trying to scare you. And that's a very good possibility. I can't rule that out. But I find it interesting that if there was a person out there in the forest, they were able to maneuver and manipulate through the brush and through the trees without flashlights, without the use of lights to get around, because it's pretty dark out there at night without a flashlight or any way to see. So it's possible, yes, it was somebody trying to scare us off, but in my opinion, it was unlikely, just because we never saw anybody come in with flashlights, or unless they waited out there and knew that we were coming to that exact spot, which we just kind of decided last minute to go there. So I doubt it was that. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, there were times where the rocks were thrown with some force to it, like a baseball, like a pitcher would throw a baseball. And other times they were thrown in an arcing type manner through the trees, which almost lofting them in the air. So it's been very strange. It's happened to me several occasions over the years.
Well, I just think a human, if doing it, trying to scare you or whatever, I don't think they would have the endurance to throw a mass amount of rocks at a high rate of speed. I mean, let's face it. I mean, average person's not going to be able to. Even like on baseball, you couldn't throw out a continuous amount of baseballs without getting weaker after a certain period of time. Without and that just kind of tells me that it's something that was going on. So, I mean, did it seem like they were trying to hit you or just scare you?
I think they were trying to just scare us, whatever it was, because if it wanted to hit us, it had ample opportunity to hit us. I mean, we weren't ducking behind trees, we weren't hiding, behind bushes or stuff like that, or running back to the car. We were out in the open field, and if this thing wanted to hit us, it could have hit us easily. There's no doubt. But I think it was more or less a territorial thing, kind of like an intimidation, where it wanted to drive us out of its territory or get us to leave, and eventually it worked. We ended up eventually leaving after a couple hours, but we stood our ground for a while, and it continued to throw rocks at us. And the several different occasions we've had rocks thrown at us, it wasn't just like one rock and that was it. It was several times it would go on that night. And as I mentioned, the one time we were in Clearfield where it threw rocks at us for a 10 or 15-minute period, and then it would stop, and then it would start up again. That to me shows intelligence. It's not just a random thing that's happening, and it's either a person doing it or something else. That's the only way I can answer that.
Interesting. And it was like a lot of force. And again, they were about the size like baseball size rocks?
Yeah, baseball, if not larger, yes. And there's been times where we've had rocks thrown at us that were just small pebbles. And even pine cones, we've had pine cones thrown at us, which I find fascinating. But, we've had sticks, pine cones, rocks, those types of things thrown at us before.
Have you heard any of like banging on tree noise or in case of banging on rocks or anything to,
Oh, yeah. I've heard that quite frequently, actually. And just for your listeners to understand, when I go out and do research, or any researcher goes out and does research, they'll tell you 95 to 98% of the time it's nothing happens. It's quiet. It's normal. It's a typical night in the forest where you hear typical wildlife and bugs and crickets and frogs and stuff like that. So it's a very dull night. But the times that it does happen, it can get quite intense and quite exciting. We've had some really interesting experiences out there in the forest, and I don't know. I've never seen a Bigfoot myself. I've never witnessed something chase me out of the woods and drop down to all fours like you had. So I can't say that there's something out there that might be a Bigfoot, but there's something out there that's throwing rocks and throwing sticks, and people are seeing something. That's the best conclusion I can come to at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I heard even speculation for some people say maybe it's some of the people that came back from Vietnam at one point, years ago. And then, you hear the ones that came back from Iraq. Maybe they just went out to the woods, to get away from humans. And then you get on their area. But I don't know about that either because, it's interesting because I have done some research. One of my family members married into a local Indian tribe, a Muckleshoot Indian tribe up here. And about a year or so ago, they don't have a medicine man. Well, maybe they do now, but then they didn't have a medicine man. They had a medicine woman. And I was really inquisitive about Bigfoot, and I was talking to her. And I said, do Bigfoot exist? What can you tell me, from folklore of, your tribe? And she sat there for like an hour and a half, was telling me all these, stories about Bigfoot. Like they would come into their village and run off with with a squaw or a baby, or the squaws would be down in the river, washing their clothes, and they would have the babies, on the river bank. And all of a sudden, she said, like a group of Bigfoot would run in, grab the babies or the squaws, right? Then the tribe would go out, trying to, rescue to get them back. And they would occasionally find bones, if anything. And she was very intimate about, that actually all happened. And this is around like the 1880s, 1870s, all the way up.
Oh yeah, there's a long history of encounters and sightings that have occurred that date well back into the 1700s, and there's documented newspaper articles anybody can find online. If you do a little bit of research, you can find from the early 1800s. Here in Pennsylvania, my home state, the earliest documented encounter with a creature, the wild boy of the woods, actually took place in 1837. So there are documented articles. This is just a phenomenon that started in the 1950s or 60s. This has been going on for hundreds of years. And Native American tribes, there's over 200 Native American tribes across the continent, the United States continent, that have a name for a wild man or a hairy man or another tribe of Native American Indians that they have in their legend and lore that they talk about. There's a creature in the Pacific Northwest, Native Americans call the Buqua, and the Buqua was the woman of the woods. She said that she carried a basket, and she would come down and collect squaws and children and take them off back to her cave to eat. And they would tell these tales to the younger tribes, the boys and girls in the tribes, the children, to keep them away from the forest and from wandering off into the forest at night, to keep them safe around their teepees and huts. And they didn't want them wandering off, so they'd tell them about the Buqua. Behave, or the Buqua is going to come and get you. And that was, something they told the kids that they should be afraid of. And it happens in a lot of different tribes. It's not just one particular tribe. There's a variety of different tribes that talk about different types of creatures. Like in the British Columbia, the Chehalis Indians, that's where the term Sasquatch came from. They called it Siskavas. And J.W. Burns was up there in the early 1920s working with them, and they told him of these. They were basically a big elder brother, another race of Native American Indians that lived in the forest, and they called it the Siskavas, and he anglicized that word into Sasquatch, and that's where a lot of people think all Native American tribes call the creature Sasquatch, but they don't. There's so many different names for the creature from different tribes, and they have different meanings. Some mean wild man of the forest, hairy man, big brother, elder brother. a variety of different types of names that they